We welcome him back, Christopher Hitchens, Vanity Fair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us, and the author of this book, No One Left to Lie To. You talk about it inside the book. How'd you come up with this title?
There's a guy, there is a guy, a good man called David Shippers, who was, he's a Chicago Democrat, rather of the old school, prosecutor, who was hired by Henry Hyde to be the chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee. And in his summary speech, closing speech to the impeachment debate before the committee, he said, look, the president has now lied in a civil deposition, he's lied to a grand jury, he's lied to all his cabinet, he's lied to all his colleagues, to his family, to the American people, blah, blah, blah. There's no one left to lie to. And I was watching this, I had an earlier title in mind for the book. It was even in the catalogue already. The publishers were furious when, having seen this, I was watching it at Miami Airport on Airport TV. I thought that's got to be the title, it's perfect.
What was the original title?
It was going to be Ask Not, Tell Not.
Why did you and your publisher select this picture for the cover?
I had no idea until I sat down with the design people how many pictures there were of Clinton looking both smug and wicked and mendacious all at the same time. But that is almost the perfect one. And there's also a hint of triumph here in this one, as if he really does feel, I think that's everybody. I don't think there can be anyone left to lie to.
And I say
but my book is addressed to all the people who wanted to be lied to, and who still do. So in a way, he wins again until I can turn the tide.
When I say the name Sidney Blumenthal, what comes to mind?
Old friend of mine, unfortunately also an old friend of Mr. Clinton's, and great admirer of and worker for. And alas, as he said to the Senate in his testimony, one of those who was lied to. I mean, he realizes now that Mrs. Clinton told him a false story about Monica Lewinsky and other matters, and let him, which shows what kind of a friend Mr. Clinton is, let him go into the grand jury and retell this false and defamatory story. The grand jury was me, and I was prepared to say as much when asked by the House Judiciary Committee. And rather to my surprise, because Sidney had denied telling anyone else, it became a huge story. I mean, it was a week-long flap, which I thought rather distracted attention from the main story, which was that the president had authored effectively a slander against a former comfort woman of his for whom he had no further use. That's the kind of guy he is. It's what he quite often does. And had it circulated in such a way, I thought, as to constitute an obstruction of justice, because it was a threat to her as well as a slander of her.
I can't find the quote in here, but in the conversation that you had with Sidney Blumenthal.
Someone's been reading it closely.
I have read it, actually. But and I'm going to paraphrase, you allude to the fact that Sidney Blumenthal said, we're going to take care of Juanita Broaddrick. That's not exactly what you wrote, but can you explain what happened?
It was actually Kathleen Willey.
Kathleen Willey, I'm sorry. Kathleen
Willey. Well, I know it's hard to keep all these female victims in perspective, isn't it? I think I can now tell them apart, but it's an effort. Kathleen Willey, the week before I had my lunch with Sidney, Kathleen Willey had gone on 60 Minutes to say that she had been the recipient of unwelcome attentions from the president. I thought she looked like she was telling the truth. I have heard since that she's been subjected to various kinds of intimidation of a sort of rather mysterious kind about it. I brought it up with Sidney, or it came up at the lunch, and I remember he said that, well, her numbers are high now. You know, the polls had found people thinking she was credible, but they'll be down by the end of the week. And what had happened was, I didn't like the tone of it, you know, so that we'll soon fix her kind of thing. But the following day, I think it was, the White House found and released all the private memos between her and the president. Some of them quite affectionate, you know, and admiring. She is or was a very Clintonoid Democrat. And what angered me about that, they found those and put them out in a day, more or less. Those had been subpoenaed not long before by the Paula Jones lawyers, those same memos, and they wanted any and all paper contact between the president and Ms. Willey. White House said, sorry, we just can't seem to find them. We just can't find them. You can subpoena us all you want. We can't put our hands on the papers. Once they needed to reply to 60 Minutes, though, they found the papers in short order. And that struck me as so typical of the MO of this White House. It's so 10th rate and nasty and underhand. Like everything about this president and his tactics.
Midway through the book, you point out, first of all, that the president had precisely 2 cabinet meetings in 1998.
Yeah, count them, 2.
One in January.
To lie to the cabinet.
And one in August.
To tell him he was going to have to tell some bit of the truth, after all. And sorry about that, guys. He didn't really say sorry, as a matter of fact. He defended himself in the usual bombastic way when Donna Shalala said, well, you know, you could get the impression, Mr. President, that you'd kind of put yourself ahead of, you know, all other considerations, your friends, your policies, all of that. You really were thinking only of yourself. He whirled on her and said, well, you're the sort of person who would have preferred Nixon to Kennedy.
Why did he say that?
Well, I think he'll say anything. That was the comment that was overheard afterwards. He'll try anything. He's a complete solipsist. And he's completely without scruple. But I think the consequences of the first meeting are the graver ones, because at the end of that meeting, whether the cabinet were persuaded by his lying or not, I don't know, in their hearts, so to speak, but they were induced to go out into the street. The Vice President did, and the Secretary of State did, and make complete abject fools of themselves by saying they were absolutely sure he was telling the truth. Now, that's what everyone sees when they see Madeleine Albright coming to a negotiation now. You know, they see, oh, well, great, there's the woman who believed the president about Monica Lewinsky and went out and stood outside in the street and said, everything's fine. Nobody resigned. Only one person has resigned from this administration. It wasn't over any of these things. And it wasn't someone who'd been humiliated, as these people were. They've lost all their pride, all their dignity.
Later in this chapter, you say that I've known a number of people who work for him or with him and who have worked with this man. They act like cult members while they are still under the spell and talk like ex-cult members as soon as they've broken away.
Yes, that's true.
George Stephanopoulos?
George is the one I know the best, yeah. Maybe it's slightly unfair to say that he acted completely like a cult member while he was working there. He's a relatively straight guy and rather decent, I think. But, you know, he had to often stand up for or defend impossible positions. He talks much like an ex-cult member. Now he's left there. He talks like someone who will say, this is, you know, believe it or not, trust me, I used to believe this. This is how I used to think. And now, I can't imagine how I did, but I don't think it anymore. That was what made it familiar to me.
And let me bring up one other point, and then we'll get to calls. You talk about the money.
You were smiling, I encouraged you.
Well, I'm laughing. Let me read this, and then I'll have you follow up. You talk about David Geffen, Steven Spielberg of DreamWorks, who have contributed close to $400,000 and $236,000 to the Clintons of the Democratic Party, the Waltons of Walmart, $216,000, and Larry and Sheila Lawrence of the Hotel Del Coronado and their associated real estates, $100,000 of contributions by their companies or their employees to the president or the Democratic Party. You go on to say that Mr. Lawrence later achieved a brief celebrity by his triple crown of buying, lying, and dying.
Yeah.
Explain.
Well, he and his wife gave all this money, and therefore they got into the Lincoln bedroom, because, as you know, this president, let me put it like this, maybe because I'm an immigrant to this country, I perhaps am too easily overcome with reverence, but it seems to me one of the things about Clintonism is that it's profaned, it's blasphemed, by turning the Oval Office into a sort of cheap massage parlor, the Lincoln bedroom into a sort of cheap motel for fat cats, and Arlington Cemetery into something that can be franchised for fundraising. Mr. Lawrence invented a war record for himself so that he could, along with a hefty donation, have himself buried in Arlington Cemetery, and he and his wife appointed to diplomatic positions and so on. When it was all discovered that this had been a fraud, and that the money shouldn't really have been handed over anyway, he had to be dug up out of Arlington Cemetery and reburied. Now that would get me down if I was a patriotic American, which I can't claim to be. And I was appalled and rather astonished that it didn't get people down, that things that we're supposed to teach the children about, now the Lincoln bedroom, Mr. Lincoln's bedroom, for heaven's sake, used as a motel, the Oval Office used as a massage parlor, and Arlington Cemetery used as a dump for lying fat cat fundraisers. This is appalling, isn't it? And yet everyone said, but these are private matters. Leave the guy alone. Well, my impression is that now that it's over and he's walked, just literally walked, got clean away with everything, and not apologized, and said that he doesn't regard impeachment as a disgrace. That now people are turning away from him. And for reasons they can't quite explain, I have a lot of people come up to me now and say, you know, I didn't agree with you about this, or I don't agree with you about that, but when he comes on the TV now, I can't watch it anymore. So I'm really hoping that that's going to become general. And if he can't be thrown out of office, at least people will turn their backs on him.
The book is called No One Left to Lie To. Our guest is Christopher Hitchens, Del Mar, California, on our conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning. I continue to be very troubled by the so-called trial that took place in the Senate. I wonder if you can reveal anything to me why a Republican Senate was so accommodating to the other side. I heard Mr. Shippers, who I thought should have really done the trial, say that Joseph Biden, a Democrat who, from Robert Bork fame, vetoed him. Why did Trent Lott allow this trial really not to take place? Even the Republican senators from Maine didn't want witnesses, live witnesses. I mean, it was, 7 hours of videotape testimony of a president who I believe they all know is unfit to be there, and we probably wouldn't have this war if they had convicted him.
Thanks, caller.
On the weekend after there was this row about my testimony to the House Judiciary Committee, I did get a call at home, as I've been told I might, from a senator, a senior Democrat, a guy I actually quite admire. I can't give his name, alas, but who said that he, after what I'd said and other things that he'd learned, he was now determined that he would vote to convict on, certainly on the count of obstruction of justice. I was impressed, and then he began to talk about how, well, maybe the thing's been presented in too partisan a way, and I remember thinking, I wonder if he really is going to vote. And of course, that day, to the lasting shame of the Democratic Party, he voted. Not one single Democratic senator voted to convict on the evidence, which was quite clearly preposterous. And that was the most noticeable thing. But the lady questioner is quite right to say that there was a mysterious lack of enthusiasm on the Republican side. It would take a long time to explain all the reasons I think why that's true. But in effect, there had been a Clinton-Gingrich co-presidency until quite recently. The Republican Party had no real political quarrel with the president. The president, after all, was enacting most of their program, and in the middle, indeed, of the trial itself. He, in a step that I think, among other things, constitutes vote buying in the potential jury, announced that, yes, after all, he is going to not just test but build the Star Wars, the SDI system, the most expensive and destabilizing and dangerous and wasteful boondoggle in military, in political, indeed in political and economic history. So they were aware of that. They had the president where they wanted him. They say, okay, you enact our agenda, we might go easy on you. The second thing was that the Republican Party knows how to watch Wall Street and the opinion polls as well as anybody else does, perhaps a little better, certainly no worse. And it seemed to be the ruling of Wall Street and the Dow Jones and the opinion polls that impeachment was a waste of time or diversion, or at best. And at a meeting in Palm Beach of, I think it's called the Golden Eagles or some such, it's the Republican backers. I've sometimes heard it called the donor community, which always makes me laugh. The party had been told pretty much, you know, who cares about whether there's a crook as president? There are worse things than a crooked president if the guy knows, you know, what policies to pursue. Get with the program. I think Trent Lott was capable of picking up that signal.
This quote above the title of the book, well-traveled, hyper-educated, pissed off, always funny. Is that how you describe yourself? The quote, we should point out, is from Voice Literary Supplement.
It's from a very kind critic in the Village Voice who said that. It wouldn't be for me to say. The pissed off bit I can say is true. If now I know that, which I didn't know till just this moment, that you can say pissed off at breakfast time on C-SPAN.
Boone, North Carolina, for Christopher Hitchens. Good morning.
I have a question, several questions, and some points I'd like to bring up. One of the questions, kind of rhetorical, would be, why is Mr. Hitchens there wasting all his talents on bashing Mother Teresa and Bill Clinton? It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. And I saw...
What's a foregone conclusion?
Well, it's pretty obvious with what we've got. We just got to do the best with what we've got. And as far as Mother Teresa, you know, who cares? She did her job. But I saw you on Fox, and looks like Fox found the mother lode of all Clinton bashers, and it seems as though if Fox is going to use you, give Fox 100% Christopher Hitchens.
Okay.
And one other point is the real reason why we're in Kosovo is probably because the CIA didn't support Tanich, and the State Department didn't support Tanich, the American millionaire who was a true Democrat. That's small d.
Okay. Thanks, caller.
That reminds me that I didn't answer the other lady's question about how impeachment might have averted this war. Could I just... I mean,
Certainly.
I'll try and comprehend both questions in the same answer. I don't believe... no, start again. In my book, I say that I do believe that the president used military force in a capricious and promiscuous way to save his own skin in Sudan last August, the bombings of Khartoum and of Kabul, and also later the Christmas time or impeachment time bombings of Baghdad. I think I've made that case. If you don't find it convincing, I can only say that so far no one has rebutted or attempted to rebut this hypothesis. There's a great deal of evidence to show that the president, on his own initiative, used what should have been American military force for entirely private and corrupt purposes related to his own court calendar. It's the most shocking allegation to be made, I think, against the president, and the appalling fact that it's true hasn't sunk into people yet, because I don't think they can quite take it, but they'll have to face it. And of course it's conditioned the responses of other nations to any threat or promise made by the president, because they know that at least they can suspect him of this, which is not a healthy state of affairs. However, I think there was going to be a confrontation in Kosovo anyway. I don't believe for a moment the president engineered such a thing in this matter. It no doubt suits him that he can pose as commander-in-chief while the Cox report on China is coming out and one or two other things, such as very believable rape allegations, are circulating. But I don't blame him for taking advantage of that. I mean, almost any politician would, and it clearly suits him to do so. He's a lousy commander-in-chief, as you can see from the progress of the war. Not one of the things said by him about why it was being fought or how turned out to be true. But I don't think it's a wag-the-dog state of affairs. Mr. Panich I've met. He was is a Californian Serb, successful businessman, and, funnily enough, old political friend and colleague of Jerry Brown's. And there was a time when it looked as if he might, if there was a fair election in former Yugoslavia, he might win. And he was opposed to the atrocities in Bosnia and the totalitarian character of the Milosevic regime. And yes, it is a shame in a way he didn't get more support while he was a live candidate. We don't do anything to help the Serbian opposition.
Christopher Hitchens grew up in South England, a graduate of Oxford University. Our next call is from Wichita Falls, Texas.
Yeah,
good morning.
I was there with the president.
Were you?
I was at Oxford at the same time, yeah.
Did you remember him? Did
No.
you meet him?
I remember the house where he lived, because it was the number of draft resistors were there. And I was a supporter of the anti-war movement.
Was it Bodleian College?
Balliol was my college.
Balliol.
Mr. Clinton was at University College. 46 Leckford Road was where they used to hang out, and I used to go around and help dish out leaflets and that kind of thing. The president, unfortunately, turned out to be not a draft resistor, but a draft dodger, which is a quite different thing. I think never to be confused. There were a lot of very brave young Americans in that stage who were prepared to take the consequences of opposing the war. One of the early signs of Mr. Clinton's lousy character was that he wasn't prepared to take those consequences. He just wanted to squeeze through and avoid the draft, which is not a creditable position to take.
His roommate, Strobe Talbot?
I remember Talbot. I remember Ira Magazine, and I remember quite well. I knew him. Just my luck. Robert Reich, Strobe Talbot, one or two others now I think about it. The name will come back to me.
Let's get this call from Texas, if you think of it. Go ahead, caller. Thanks for waiting.
Good morning. Mr. Hitchens, I think you're about the lowest of life. You have never liked this president. You've never liked him. I want to make a comment, and then I have a question. You have been from the very beginning onto this. You're a Jerry Brown fan and that kind of people. It doesn't matter who it is that you don't like. You run around the Fox, you do all these things, and you lie. You people like you have made a mint off of this president. You write books. You have no sources for it. You sitting there talking about you knew where he lived. Well, I'd like to see the picture. I'd like to see somebody tell me, besides people like you. I've been watching this, and I used to live in West Memphis, Arkansas, by the way, so I know a little bit about Arkansas. I know a little bit about Paula Jones. and I know her relatives, and I know someone that works for the state who is named Paula. So, I mean, this old crap is a little tiring by now, and your books are running out, and I hope you don't sell one. Now, about Sidney Blumenthal. Why do you want to go and get on to your friends and go on about all this crap? You people are just absolutely sickening. You can't do anything on your own. You don't write real stories. You put out gossip and rumors about other people. You are sick.
Okay, we'll get a response. Thanks, caller.
I quite often get asked if I've sort of got Clinton on the brain, you know, and in a way, I suppose I have. I mean, that is partly because, as the lady says, I did, from the very first time I saw him in New Hampshire, I did think there was something revolting about him. Not something more than a political disagreement. In other words, I hated his politics and his dishonesty, but I thought there was something potentially monstrous about the guy. This was because, I don't know if you remember the case, but when he was in trouble in the polls over Jennifer Flowers and his lying about her, he went back to Arkansas, of which he was still governor, and supervised the execution of a mentally disabled, in fact a lobotomized black defendant called Ricky Ray Rector. A very cruel and cold and nasty attempt to sort of show that he could be a tough guy. And I was appalled by that, and also by the silence of the liberals about it. And I have, yeah, it's true, I have detested him ever since.
What do you think of Mrs. Clinton?
It may have upset, it may have made me sick, I don't know. The book is certainly in my mind an attempt to get him out of my system, but I think now I'll have to stick with it until the guy's gone one way or another, which isn't, thank heaven, that long now. As for the Mint, in case anyone wonders, I mean, you try it. I hope my publishers are listening. This is published by Verso, a small house that's the publishing arm of the New Left Review. I don't think I've had an advance yet, and if I told you how much it was, you wouldn't believe anyway, because you'd think I was lowballing it. Mrs. Clinton, I've met her.
Do you want to say the amount?
I think it was $5 grand. Which it has to, you know, it has to make that back. So this is why I hope people are going to rush out and get it.
$5,000 to write this book. Mrs. Clinton.
Mrs. Clinton. Well, I can't understand why people think she's owed a Senate seat. Somehow it seems that after all she's done for us, we ought to find her a place in the Senate. I don't get this at all. What has she done for us except be the self-pitying, robotic defendant of someone who is a pathological liar, almost certainly a rapist, and, as I show in the book, a minor war criminal. All she's done is say that it's always someone else's fault. That plus, I suppose, very nearly single-handedly took the work of many people over many years to build up a consensus on national health coverage and universal health care and just piss it away in a couple of months, so that now there's no question in anybody's mind that the healthcare situation in the United States is much worse than when the Clintons were elected, very much worse, steeply worse, both for the profession and for the patients, because of the takeover of the whole healthcare business by the HMO racket. Probably one of the greatest single social disasters of the century. I don't see that she gets a Senate seat for that, do you?
Fort Walton Beach, Florida, on our conservative line. Good morning.
Hello, Mr. Hitchens. I'm a conservative, and I hope I'll be a contrast to your previous caller.
She sounded pretty conservative to me.
Position on Mr. Clinton, even though we have different ideological views. My comment is I would like to ask your opinion or to get your comments on the comparisons that have been made to what's going on in Kosovo. A lot of people have compared the situation in Kosovo to what's happened in World War II and Hitler, and also to the beginnings of World War I. I think a more appropriate comparison would be to what happened in Waco under Janet Reno and the massacre of innocent people in that situation. Here you had a despotic individual that was supposedly, it was rumored, was conducting atrocities on the people that were under his control, and then you had the government step in and with their jackbooted thugs came in and actually massacred innocent people in an attempt to right the wrong that they were attempting to do. And my other concern is the lack of response in the country for such a thing. In other words, there appeared to be no outrage. And I'd like you to get your comment on that, please.
Well, I don't think there's any comparison at all between Mr. Koresh and Mr. Milosevic, and presumably neither do you. I don't know whether you intend the analogy to go that far, since you appear to think that Mr. Koresh was innocent. I mean, I don't know that that's absolutely true. I think there are signs that it wasn't a very nice organization to belong to, especially if you were a kid who hadn't had the option of joining. That's usually true of these cult groups anyway. Doesn't excuse what the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms and Tobacco did, which, and as you say, it was a means by which we discovered that there was yet another armed and dangerous para-state force in the country that's entitled to come and kick down your door, as if there weren't enough of those already. So I'm with you so far, but Mr. Milosevic is everything that is said of him. I mean, you don't have to call him Hitler and all that kind of thing, but I was in Sarajevo for a while, and I've been in the region a fair bit, and I'm convinced myself that the charge that he's an aggressor and a racist and a dictator and a war criminal are all absolutely solidly true. The tragedy for me of the present war is that it's not being fought for the advertised purpose. I mean, if the war aims were what we said they were, or they were believed to be, namely to get the Kosovo refugees back home and Mr. Milosevic out of power, I would be impressed. But it seems to me that can't really be the objective. The objective seems more to boost the credibility, another overused word, of a cumbersome and discredited NATO alliance.
Westminster, Maryland, good morning on our moderate line.
Moderate line?
Good morning.
Liberal, moderate, and conservative.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
What about extremist? Where are my friends?
I'm an ex-extremist.
Ah.
Yes, from the left. But I consider myself a moderate now, comparatively speaking. I take Mr. Hitchens as being a part of a great tradition on American television that began, I think, probably with Gore Vidal.
That's too kind, but I'll do my best to accept it with grace.
I have a great deal of trouble with the ability of the American people to actually sum up and get angry about Kosovo, its policy and its effect. If you looked at the condition of the average Albanian Kosovar, as they call them, prior to the bombing and now, what have they won? I mean, their world has been lost, and I'm afraid that American policy has, without an exit strategy, has no way of getting them back.
Mr. Milosevic has an exit strategy, though, doesn't he? Or rather, an exodus strategy, and he's had one for a long time. And of course, everybody knew that he was planning to do this, and that's what makes it so disgraceful. Mike Kelly did a very good column about this in the Washington Post a little while ago. He noticed the press briefing given by Prime Minister Massimo D'Alema of Italy, the new Italian leader, who'd been in Washington a couple of weeks before the bombing, and had been to see the president, because Italy's the frontline country. It's the nearest to Albania. That's where the air bases are, and that's where the refugees are going to try and head. If they can splash their way across from Bari, that's where Albanians always try and go. So in all those three ways, Mr. D'Alema was entitled to ask, what the real plan was. And he said, in his briefing, I asked the president, what will you do if we bomb and it doesn't change Milosevic's policy, but he does turn on the Albanian Kosovo population, civilian population? Perfectly good question. I mean, anyone, he would have been a fool not to ask it. And he told the press that the president looked at him as if he was hearing the question for the first time, as if that thought had not occurred to him. And that he then turned to Sandy Berger. I'd hate to be in a position where I can only rely on Mr. Berger for advice, I must say. And said, well, what would we do, Sandy, in that situation? And Berger said, well, I guess we'd just keep on bombing. Well, this is outrageous.
Silver Spring, Maryland.
They then compounded this by saying, when the refugees were immediately kicked out in their hundreds of thousands and found on the hillsides of Macedonia and Albania, from the president and from the Joint Chiefs and from Mrs. Albright and Mr. Cohen, we were told, oh, don't reproach us with that. We knew that was going to happen. We're not surprised by this. Well, we were expecting it. They were expecting it. What kind of an admission is that? That makes them accomplices, in point of fact. We have to hope for their sake that they're lying, because if they're telling the truth, then they would have to go to The Hague as well as Milosevic and be charged with complicity in crimes against humanity. The reason it's possible they are lying is that if they knew it was coming, then why were there no blankets and Pampers and food parcels and bottled water at the frontier? I mean, if they were expecting this flood of immiserated, homeless, terrified people, they certainly didn't look as if they'd made any provision for it. And then they said, Well, I tell you what, since you have been kicked out, had your lives wrecked and all that, maybe we can have you live on a barbed wire encampment we've got in Cuba. I mean, as the caller just said, you know, if you didn't laugh, you'd have to cry, or you'd have to pretend that you hadn't noticed and just get on with your life. But the shame of this is unbelievable, it seems to me. Unbelievable shame.
Go ahead, Silver Spring. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a long-time viewer, and 67-year-old African-American, and retired Navy veteran of 25 years of Korean and Vietnam War. And Mr. Hitchens fascinates me. He really gets to the core of a lot of things. I voted for Clinton twice, and I can't stand to watch him on TV. And I hate to say this, but as an amateur student of American history, I find him very much American, very much represents what this country is to a large degree. And I have no doubt in my mind that if he was in Milosevic's place, he would be just as ruthless and bloody. And if he had it in his power to really direct the armed forces during his impeachment, I think he would have surrounded the Capitol building and probably rounded up all the Republicans and paraded them off somewhere.
Caller, did you vote for the president in either of the two elections?
He said twice.
Twice? I'm sorry, I missed that
He said
part.
twice. Twice too many.
What turned the tide for you?
Just watching him on TV, his facial expressions, his wiggle worming.
What do you think of this picture on the cover of Christopher Hitchens' new book?
Yeah, that it almost nauseates me, and a lot of his facial expressions. There's no doubt that he's a smart man, but I don't know.
We'll get a response. Thanks.
Americans, I guess, believe that O.J. was guilty too, so me and my wife go around and around on these various subjects. But since I'm fully retired, I'm a C-SPAN addict, and I watch it constantly, you know, and I appreciate getting through to express my humble opinions.
We're glad to hear from you. We'll get Christopher Hitchens' humble response.
No, it doesn't get any better than that. I think we should just let him speak for himself. Good man.
Iva, South Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning. I hate to disappoint the woman that called earlier, but I can't wait to go buy your book.
Huh.
I share every thought in your head.
Let me ask him, he brought up a good point. Is this now at bookstores?
Oh, yes, at fine bookstores everywhere.
And what about Amazon.com or Borders Online?
It was number 15 on Amazon.com's list yesterday, I was pleased to see.
And how much is it, by the way?
Well, I think that depends where you go buy it. My publishers are either too cheap or too slithery to actually put a price on the cover. But places like Barnes & Noble, I guess, discount books. I think it'll run you, though, about $18. I must say, I think that's rather a lot for such a small book. But if you don't like the president, it'll probably be worth it to you. And if you do, it'll certainly be worth it to you.
Go ahead, caller. I'm sorry.
If you do like the president, it's the best $18 you'll ever spend.
So you'll spend $18 for this?
Well, you could probably get it for $15.
Well,
shop around.
I have distrusted him from
or buy in
the very
bulk.
beginning. And thank you for your book, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
No question, caller? Just a comment? She must have hung up. Phoenix, Arizona. Good morning for Christopher Hitchens.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. I just wanted to comment on one of the calls that Mr. Hitchens received from the woman, and it was with great criticism. And I think it is typical of the non-thinking liberal segment of the population. And I would further opine that this country seems to be now run by propaganda, fear, and paranoia. And
Nope, gone. Well, I would say next.
Cleveland, Ohio. Good morning.
As far as what you're stating, basically, you're only stating your views on all of this.
Don't state anyone else's.
I can't hear you because do you really have any facts to back anything? And secondly, I am a Democrat, and I do wonder, George W. Bush seems to be leading the pack by 50-some% or whatever it is now. He hasn't said a word yet. How could these Republicans back up somebody that hasn't said anything? I think this is so stupid. When is he going to open his mouth? Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
Do you ever notice how people sometimes will say, when you've said something yourself, they'll say, well, that's only your opinion. And you think, well, yeah, I mean, that's true. Who else's opinion could it possibly be? So it's a tick. Some people do this. That's my reply to that. As to assertions of fact, yes, I do, and the book contains one or two of those. I mean, the most, so to speak, damning or horrendous accusation I make against the president, which I've made elsewhere and in print and on the air, that he did wag the dog over Khartoum in August and Afghanistan in August and Iraq in December. I wouldn't, believe me, I'm not ducking your question, but I have put it out in print several times. No one has yet come up with the argument that disproves the evidence as I lay it out, or the timeline as I lay it out. The way, for example, I'll give you one fact, that the president wouldn't consult the Joint Chiefs about launching those missiles. He kept them out of the decision, wouldn't talk to the CIA or the FBI as far as possible, made it a personal presidential matter of caprice, and thus hit the wrong target because there was no time to find out it was the wrong one. And the reason for the hurry was that Ms. Lewinsky was due that day to go back to the grand jury. Things like that. Do you know how many people who've been asked to testify before the Senate Committee on the campaign finance scandal, which may turn into the greatest scandal of all time if it turns out to be connected to the Chinese People's Republic's theft of nuclear intelligence, which I think it is going to prove to be, by the way. Do you know how many people of the Clinton fundraising community were asked to come before that committee and either fled the country, became fugitives from justice, or took refuge in the Fifth Amendment? Here's a fact for you. 121. 121 people currently refusing, by one means or another, to say what they know on the campaign finance question. That's a lot. That really is quite a lot of people. In fact, I think the political corruption of the electoral process has never been as boldly practiced as by any administration as by this one, or by any president as by this one. I wouldn't exempt even Richard Nixon from that judgment.
We have a lot of emails. Let me go through a couple of them. One in Tampa, Florida. Gloria Blankley says, the lady insulting Mr. Hitchens is no better than the other enablers of this draft-dodging president. I'm finally hearing the truth about this man. Another says, there is no one I would rather listen to than Christopher Hitchens. I disagree with his political views, but he is so profoundly erudite, the William Buckley of the left. That from Jay McCarthy of Marblehead, Massachusetts.
Gore Vidal and William Buckley, to be called both in the same show. Is this in the first half? Or are we past the...
Just about 40 minutes in.
In the first 40 minutes. That's pretty good. That makes my day. Either one would have made my day, but both really does it. Thank you. I don't deserve it.
Then we get this from Jerry and Janice. Your guest is a buffoon.
Ah. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And there's this. Your guest, a Vanity Fair, makes me puke.
Okay. No, but still... They can't take it away from me, the Vidal and Buckley stuff. They just can't take it away from me. Surely, is that all they say?
There's more, but we're going to get back to calls. Worcester, Massachusetts, for Christopher Hitchens. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Hitchens, I have a question. Earlier you made the comment about President Clinton, making the comment to Donna Shalala about her preferring Nixon over Johnson. And I just wanted to ask...
Nixon over Kennedy.
Over Kennedy, excuse me. I had a question. After the impeachment, his first press conference, Mr. Clinton told the story about the man falling off the cliff and grabbing onto a branch. I wanted to know, because you know this administration, does he actually believe this when he says it, and believe this when he says it to his cabinet members, or is he part of a strategy to infuriate his enemies or infuriate his critics so they'll speak out more against him, therefore his poll rating go up more? Do you have any comment on this?
Well, it's a thing you have to ask yourself all the time about Clinton, because you can only make, it's like what used to be called the Cretan paradox, the philosopher Zeno came up with, saying all Cretans are, all men from Crete are liars. But what if you're told that by someone who is himself from Crete? Is that statement still true if it's said by someone who's from Crete already? The Clinton paradox is the same. You wonder if he's lying even when you suspect he might be telling the truth. For example, he, just on this matter of the impeachment and the trial, he said that he had never read the Starr report. He said that he never watched any of his own trial. Now, suppose those statements should be taken at face value. I mean, I suppose he wanted those statements to be believed. Why should he want people to believe that he didn't even trouble to read the document that had created all this fuss and that was the account of all the trouble that he, Clinton, had put everyone to? And isn't it astonishing that he would want us to believe that he wouldn't even watch his own trial by the United States Senate? What was he doing instead? Playing golf? Having phone sex? We don't know. But I mean, he wanted us to believe that. But I thought to myself, well, what does he take us for? Or what is he really like if he thinks those are clever remarks to make? So, and he does have a very lively sense of his own self-interest, and you can't say he's not good at manipulating public opinion and public opinion polls. But these just seem to me to be giveaways of a personality that's just deeply rotten.
Does he know who you are?
I don't think so. Well, I wonder now. He might.
If you had the opportunity...
I've never met him. I've met him. I've asked him a question in New Hampshire. I asked him about the lynching that he conducted of Ricky Ray Rector, but he turned his back on me. He wouldn't answer that question.
If you had the opportunity, would you ask him a question in a White House news conference?
No. I don't go to those things. I mean, I've got a pass and so on, but I've stopped going because it's humiliating. Like this business tomorrow night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's embarrassing as a member of the profession to go to these things now because you're being used as part of the furniture. You're part of the effects. You're part of the props, the stage set. It's degrading to go, I think. And not that the president is in the habit of giving much in the way of press conferences this year. I mean, one of the many signs of the sort of banana republic kind of regime that he's been running is that he won't meet with the press unless he absolutely has to, or unless he can shelter behind or drag in as a prop of some visiting dignitary who's worth 10 of him.
Al Kamen writes about the dinner you just alluded to tomorrow night. We'll have coverage of the dinner, which our coverage gets underway at 9:30 East Coast time. Al Kamen writes, black tie, wires optional. Michael Isikoff is getting the Edgar Allan Poe Award from the White House Correspondents Association. And for a while, the president said that he was either not going to show up or travel somewhere else, like Littleton, Colorado, or an Air Force base in Europe, or sucking up and going. He's decided, according to Al Kamen, to suck it up and go, but he will not be on hand for the award ceremony. Can you explain?
Yeah, every year there's this terrible event at the Washington Hilton where where the press grovels to the president and the president grovels to the press. It's a horrible thing to see. The president tries to show he's got a sense of humor. The press tries to disprove what's already obviously not true, namely that it has an adversarial relationship to the presidency. It's a humiliating evening, and lousy food and bad speeches, and worst of all, because the journalistic profession gives itself far too many of these as it is, prizes are handed out, like party favors. And Mike Isikoff, who is a very good reporter and has written a very good book, has got this prize. And I was trying to persuade him last week. He came to my book party in Los Angeles that he shouldn't go up to be given the prize by the president. He's got the award. That's an honor, if you like. There's a small check. Put it in the bank. You don't have to go and be part of the stage management of this appalling liar and jerk. And if it was a corporation, Newsweek wouldn't let him do it, quite rightly. I don't know what he had decided, but now, unfortunately, Clinton's decided for him that he's not going to be there to hand him the award. So it should have been Michael who said, I wouldn't take it from the president anyway.
Ventura, California. Good morning.
Well, hi. Mr. Hitchens, I didn't vote for the president either time and have never been much of a fan of the president. But if you compare this president and presidency with the previous presidencies and the kinds of things that happened inside those administrations and the kind of foreign policy that they used and the kind of economic policy that they used, this one may have this odd style, but in the end, it's not a whole lot different, you know.
Well, I can certainly see the force of that point, but I'd add one observation, though, which is part of the motive for my book. My book is, in a way, it's an address to American liberals and to American liberalism. When Mr. Nixon and Mr. Reagan and Mr. Bush did the sort of things I imagine you have in mind, either at home or abroad, there was always a section of the population, quite a large one, in fact, and in the academy as well, and on campus, I mean by that, and in my profession and elsewhere, who at least claimed they weren't taken in by it and were prepared to oppose it. With Mr. Clinton, however, enacting, for all practical purposes, a conservative Republican agenda is a word I hate, but there's no alternative to it. The liberals went quiet, they went dead, they couldn't criticize him. In fact, they often not just went quiet, but they noisily defended him with completely preposterous and illogical syllogisms such as, well, it's a private matter if he's corrupt. It's his business. It's no concern of ours. Everybody lies, they said, as if everybody lied in that way. Which meant that, in effect, there was no political opposition left in the country, except the extreme right, or some of the extreme right, and the religious right. Well, that's the situation we've never been in before, where the consensus, a consensus is completely bodyguarded and absolutely corrupt and worthless politician. So I thought that made it, for me, more serious. And so the book is a riposte to all those who tried to carry the guy when it was possible to have seen through him.
Kauai, Hawaii, for Vanity Fair's Christopher Hitchens. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I'm a little bit nervous, so, bear with me.
What time is it there?
I actually don't know. I kind of sit up and watch C-SPAN a lot. What I wanted to ask Mr. Hitchens was, why does he have an opinion as to why is it that hate is is such a strong thing? I mean, I knew him from a long time ago. I used to admire him a lot and everything, but I feel like he's getting so consumed with it, and it's not good for him. I think that I don't know. I feel kind of bad for him. I feel bad for Bill Clinton. I feel bad for him. It's like the hatred is just, it's making everybody do things that maybe ordinarily, they wouldn't do, and it's going around so much. I mean, you hear it on talk radio shows, and, and I mean, like, it's just, I mean, people could, if they could just step back a little bit, like Mr. Hitchens, for instance, if he could just step back. I mean, he brought it back to maybe the reason he hates Bill Clinton is from the time when he did that, the execution thing, which I don't know the full story of, but I mean, I just want to ask him, I just want to ask him as a human being to another human being if he could try to, just step back a little bit and kind of see other things about Bill Clinton. He's not a perfect person. He really isn't. He's very imperfect, but he does have good, a good side, like everybody else. I'm sure he does. Mr. Hitchens, I'm sure you have some things that are good about you and some things that are not perfect.
I'd be glad to think so, certainly. As she says, she doesn't know about the Ricky Ray Rector case, the killing of this defenseless and disabled man, but very few people do. Whereas if a Republican candidate had tried to extricate himself from a tough primary by killing a lobotomized black man, I think the name of that man would be very well known by now, because among other things, the liberals in the press would have made a big stink about it. The appalling thing about Clinton is that he's been able to do these things and not be questioned by the liberal community, the liberal constituency. Sorry, I'm not going to step back, ma'am. I can't oblige you. Among other things, I have a book to sell, so I have to go out on the road with nothing but a smile and a shoe shine.
Seattle, Washington, good morning.
Hi, I'm a little nervous. I've never done this before. So,
is there a nervous line?
No need to be nervous. Go ahead, caller.
Well, I followed Mr. Hitchens for a long time, The Nation and all that, and a good writer because he infuriates me one time, and then I totally agree with him the other time. I do take umbrage at the description of Sister Mother Teresa that as the ghoul of Calcutta. I thought that was a bit much. But as far as this third way that Mr. Clinton and Mr. Blair, whom I throw on the same boat, are furthering, is this Kosovo and NATO agenda part of that? And does this third way take into account the cultural differences, or is it in fact their desire for a monoculture oligarchical type system that overrides the cultural differences between people?
Well,
does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Though I'm not absolutely certain what you... I think I'm going to make a guess as to what you mean by the second point. But on the first one, I think it certainly is true of Mr. Blair, who is politically, or you might say ideologically, sympathetic to Clinton and similar to him, though I don't really think Clinton has any ideology beyond his own selfishness and the needs of the hour. But call them political twins, if you like, and the third way is the name they give to their project. Mr. Blair, I think, has convinced himself over the question of Serbia and Kosovo that it is possible for people of his generation born since the Second World War, Mr. Blair's even younger than I am, to fight a war that is definitely not motivated by self-interest or by empire or by any of the things that people used to suspect war of being motivated by, and that is international and legal and humanitarian. I mean, I think he thinks that that would be the achievement of his generation. So yes, that's true, and I think he thinks it's true of this war, and I must say I think he's picked the wrong war to say this about. But one of the things that makes watching this nightmare in Kosovo so appalling is precisely that. You can't say that the war is being fought for a purpose that is, as advertised, ignoble. As advertised, the purpose is a noble one. That's pessima corruptio optimi. I was taught when I was taught Latin, which I don't remember much of. It means the worst is the corruption of the best.
If you were to write a profile of Christopher Hitchens, which adjectives would you use to describe him?
I really don't think that's a fair question. I mean, you'd have to ask somebody else. But I hope, well, no, I'm not even sure I should say what I hope would be said. Can't do it.
Were you really up all night?
I was up a lot of the night.
Why?
I've had a lot of work to catch up on. There's a lot of work I've got to do before I can go off on the road, which I'm about to do. I'm about to set off on a little tour of the country, beating the bushes. The Smile and the Shoeshine are coming into play.
When do you work best?
Late at night, as a matter of fact. Probably a shame, that. Children are asleep, phone doesn't ring, it's quiet, except for the, you know, screams and gunshots and things like that.
In the book?
And I like to work then.
The book dedicated to Laura and Sophia?
Yes, my daughters.
How old are they?
Sophia will be 10 this year, and Antonio will be 6.
Pensacola, Florida, good morning.
Yes, hello. I want to turn this on mute. I would like for you to give me one statement that Clinton has said to you that you could say he is a direct liar. You know, perhaps at Oxford or wherever. One statement he has said directly to you.
To me personally?
Beg your pardon?
To me personally, you mean?
Beg your pardon?
To me personally, sir.
Yes, to you personally. You say you've known him since Oxford. You know him back when he was in Oxford. I mean, even back then. Can you tell me one?
No, I think I may have let you get the wrong impression. I very carefully said I did not know him at Oxford. I'm contemporary of his from there. I knew other people who lived at his address, other contemporaries of his, American and British, and so on. But I've never met the guy except for once in New Hampshire, where he wouldn't answer a question I asked him about the, I thought, judicial murder of Ricky Ray Rector. It was funny, too, because he was looking very much for a change of subject from Jennifer Flowers, which was all that my colleagues would care about. And I thought, as a test of character, surely executing a lobotomized black man is more strenuous test, more interesting test than lying about Jennifer Flowers. So anyway, I said, well, Governor, I do have another subject. And he sort of turned as if that would be nice. And I asked him about this, and he just turned his back and walked away. It was on the tarmac at some airport in New Hampshire.
Chicago, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Hitchens.
Good morning.
I've watched you over the last year and a half or whatever, and I have to admit I disagree with most things that you say, but I respect the way you stick to your guns. And I would like to see, perhaps with your very direct, acerbic form of journalism, using that in maybe a little bit more positive way, highlighting other things. But I think you certainly yourself, and also Mr. William Bennett, who I used to completely disagree with, I think a lot of things you've said we're actually now seeing have turned out to be true. I'm not talking about rapists or war criminals. I think that's a little bit below your intellectual level, to be quite honest with you. But anyhow, my question to you is about the Kosovo crisis. Two very quick questions. What about this double standard in the Rambouillet Agreement, where one of the stipulations is that the Kosovo Liberation Army are supposed to be de-armed or unarmed? And yet we have the Western media now eulogizing them that now they're 20,000 people and whatever. And I have a feeling the Kosovo Liberation Army is just doing the dirty work for Clinton. He doesn't have the moral strength to send the troops in. I think he does an injustice to the troops, because I'm sure the Marines, the British paratroopers, the French Foreign Legion, they would go in there. seeing what's going on.
Caller, I'm going to stop you on that note because we are short on time and we'll get a response from our guest. Thanks for the call from Chicago.
The Kosovo Liberation Army I know very little about. I don't trust anyone who says they do know it well. Allegations have been made against it that it's an extreme Leninist organization, that it's an extreme Islamic organization, and that it's a drug dealing and narcotic smuggling organization. I don't know of any evidence for any of those three propositions, and I know that a lot of what is said about KLA is slanderous, but I have a suspicion that there's an accusation you could make against it that would be true, which is that it's an extreme irredentist nationalist organization, by which I mean to say that it wants, in the end, Kosovo to become part of a greater Albania. And I think that the metastasis of the vile idea of Milosevic, Greater Serbia, a state based on ethno-fascism, internally and towards its neighbors, the metastasis of that will be Greater Albania. It'll be Milosevic's fault, but it won't be a pretty thing to see. And I think Western policy should be predicated on the idea that Greater Albania would be a bad idea too, just as Greater Serbia is.
Jacksonville, Florida.
So you're right, there is an imbalance, yes.
Good morning for Christopher Hitchens.
Yes, sir. I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Hitchenson, for writing the book. I do have two comments for you, sir. One, I'd like to find out what you know of the Ford Foundation and if you believe that the Clinton administration is involved with it. I've read several books throughout the years on that subject of a government, a larger government issue behind the scenes. And also, I'd like to correct Mr. Kelly, who was on before you, who said that there are only 10, 12,000 people in the area of both Iraq and the Kosovo area. But the fact is that there's better than 50,000 people that are deployed from the United States over there right now.
Military personnel.
Affirm.
Okay.
From the actual United States, pre-deployed, not stationed overseas. There's better than 50, almost 75,000 involved. And I believe it was just the other day you had Representative Gilman on talking, and he said that the war over in Iraq is over. And I will hate to tell you this, and the people of America do need to know this. Your military is still out there on the line every day, flying over these countries, and nobody believes the war is over, even though we're not bombing every day as we are now in Kosovo.
Appreciate the call. Thank you.
I can't help him on the Ford Foundation. I'm sorry, sir. I have no information on that.
What is triangulation?
Triangulation is three-card Monte, really. It's a fancy name for three-card Monte. It's a name. The fancy name is coined by Dick Morris, a sleazy political consultant, ultra-conservative, used to work for Jesse Helms, unscrupulous money man and bag man, and occasional procurer of women also for the president, and until recently, his only male friend. The idea of triangulation as a strategy is this: you steal the Republican Party's program, adopt it for the Democratic Party, hope you can bring the donors along, the Republican Party's donors along with you, which you often can. Then you're faced with the task of shoring up or reassuring your own constituency, and that's done by means of a sort of cheap and superficial political correctness, by which I mean Mr. Clinton was very good at going to different constituencies and suggesting that they wouldn't be safe if there was a Republican majority, to women about abortion, for example, to some civil libertarians about the Supreme Court. He's very good at resorting to that kind of thing when in a corner, for example, on this China scandal, which I think still might be the death of him, if half of what we suspect is true. His first response is to say, but this is just Asian bashing. Now, no one had done any Asian bashing. There was no suggestion at all. There wasn't, I think, even an undertone of chauvinism in the pointing out that a lot of Mr. Clinton's donors were acting for foreign powers and major Asian foreign corporations. Immediately he turns it into an, before anyone said anything, well, this is Asian bashing, as if to appeal to, you know, a latent rainbow coalition. That's the way the trick is pulled, and that's where triangulation gets you in the end, by the way.
As you may know, we're spending a lot of time on this network looking at the 41 men who have served in the White House, 41 American presidents, 42, but one served not consecutive terms. What is a fair amount of time in order to judge President Clinton through the prism of history?
Oh, I think his place in history is secure already, don't you? I mean, I really don't think that there can be much doubt about it, that people will say his was a regime of nothingness punctuated by nastiness. 8 years eaten by the locust. The time when the possibility of denuclearizing and disarming large parts of the world, he was the first real post-Cold War president, was simply thrown away. With a chance to rebuild a different relationship with Russia was thrown away in the same way, where the most sordid imaginable relationship was, however, developed with China in the most cynical possible manner. Where the worst kinds of political trickery were practiced, where the healthcare argument was lost perhaps for a whole other generation, and where the standard of public life and of what can be expected of a public servant was allowed just to collapse in free fall. You know, nothing was punctuated by nastiness. Is what it was. You don't need to wait for a verdict on Mr. Clinton.
The book, No One Left to Lie To, by Christopher Hitchens, now out, published by?
Verso, V-E-R-S-O.
Thank you very much for being with us.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.